Imagine walking into a courtroom where everyone laughs at you, mocks you, and calls you a joke, only to leave them speechless when you reveal you're the genius no one saw coming. This is a shocking story of a teenager who stunned a judge, embarrassed top lawyers, and proved that justice doesn't care about age. Stay with me till the very end, because what happens in this courtroom will blow your mind. And before we dive in, make sure to subscribe so you never miss powerful stories like this one. They laughed at him for being just a teenager, but in minutes, he shocked the courtroom, silenced the judge, and changed everything. Subscribe now and watch till the end, because this story will leave you speechless. Order in the court. The sharp sound of the gavel echoed like thunder against the wooden panels, demanding silence. The crowded courtroom shifted uneasily as all eyes turned toward the defense table. But this time, it wasn't the gavel or the judge that captured everyone's attention. It was the sight of a teenager standing alone, his hands gripping a stack of folders that seemed far too heavy for someone his age. He couldn't have been older than 17. His dark sneakers squeaked against the polished marble floor, every step betraying how out of place he looked in this intimidating room filled with men and women in sharp suits, ties, and flowing robes. His hoodie hung loosely from his shoulders, and his backpack sat awkwardly at his feet, looking more like he had just walked out of a classroom than into a courtroom. The audience whispered. Some covered their mouths to stifle laughter, while others stared in confusion. The tension in the room wasn't because of the case at hand. It was because no one could understand what a boy was doing in front of the judge's bench. The judge, a stern man with graying hair and a permanent scowl carved into his face, leaned back in his chair with exaggerated disbelief. His fingers tapped the gavel against the desk, not in rhythm but in mockery. He let out a small laugh before finally speaking. "What is this?" His voice dripped with sarcasm. "Bring your kid to court day? Did someone lose their way to the high school across the street?" The courtroom erupted with laughter. Clerks at their desks chuckled behind their hands. A few lawyers exchanged smug glances. Even the bailiff cracked a smile, though he quickly covered it when the judge's eyes swept the room. But the teenager didn't flinch. He didn't smile nervously. He didn't fumble with his papers. Instead, he calmly placed a stack of thick folders on the table, aligning them neatly. Then he looked up at the judge, meeting his mocking gaze with steady eyes. It was an unusual kind of silence that followed. People expected the boy to run, to break down, to protest that he didn't belong there. But instead, he simply stood there, as though he had every right to be in that courtroom. The judge wasn't finished humiliating him. He leaned forward, resting his chin on one hand, and letting his voice boom through the hall. "Son, do you have any idea where you are? This is not a school debate club. This is a court of law. Cases are won and lost here. Freedom and justice are decided here. And you are a child." The opposing attorney, a man in his 50s with slick-back gray hair and a perfectly tailored navy suit, couldn't resist adding fuel to the fire. He smirked at the boy and said loudly, "Your Honor, this is absurd. Allowing a kid to stand here is an insult to the integrity of this courtroom." A wave of murmurs rippled through the audience, and once again, a few muffled laughs broke free. To them, this was comedy, a break in the monotony of serious legal proceedings. They were certain the boy wouldn't last even 5 minutes under the pressure. But again, the teenager remained unshaken. He adjusted the strap of his hoodie, straightened his shoulders, and finally spoke. His voice was calm, but there was a sharpness to it that cut through the noise like a blade. "With all due respect, Your Honor," he said evenly, "I'm not here to play games. I'm here to prove the truth." The laughter stopped. For the first time, the room grew silent. Something about the boy's tone didn't match his age. It wasn't shaky or uncertain. It was composed, measured, and confident. Still, the judge scoffed. "The truth," he repeated mockingly. "Do you even understand what that word means in this room?" He shook his head and leaned back again, clearly enjoying himself. "Son, I've been on this bench for over 20 years. I've seen liars, thieves, criminals, and con men stand in front of me. I've seen the best attorneys win cases, and the weakest ones crash and burn. But I have never seen a teenager stand where you are now. You should be worried about homework, not the law." The boy didn't argue. He didn't snap back or raise his voice. He simply looked at the judge, unbothered, and quietly slid one of his folders across the desk. That small action caught the attention of the audience. Papers spilled out neatly, organized, tabbed, and highlighted. It wasn't the careless work of a student. It was a preparation of someone who had studied every detail, every word, and every angle of the case. Whispers grew louder. Where did he get that? He looked so calm. Does he actually know what he's doing? The judge noticed too, though he still kept his tone condescending. Fine, he said with a dismissive wave of his hand. You want to try? Go ahead. Let's see how long you last before you embarrass yourself. The opposing attorney chuckled under his breath, clearly certain the boy would crumble at the first question. He leaned over and whispered to a colleague, "This is going to be easier than I thought." What no one in that room realized was that the teenager wasn't just another boy who wandered into the wrong place. He wasn't there as a joke or by accident. This teenager was a prodigy, one of the youngest legal minds in the country. He had studied law in secret, passed exams that even seasoned adults struggled with, and had been granted special permission to stand in court. Today was the day he chose to reveal himself, not for glory, but for justice. And as the courtroom settled, still half amused and half curious, one thing became certain. They were about to witness a trial that would shake the very foundations of their assumptions. The boy wasn't there to play. He was there to fight, and to prove that brilliance doesn't come with age, but with determination. The judge, still smirking, had no idea that the very teenager he mocked would soon dismantle everything he thought he knew about the law. The courtroom still buzzed from the teenager's bold statement, but the judge leaned forward with a smirk, determined to remind everyone who held the authority in that room. He tapped his gavel against the desk, each strike sharp and deliberate. "Young man," the judge said slowly, his tone dripping with arrogance, "you speak of truth as if you understand what it costs. Do you have any idea where you are standing? This is not a classroom debate. This is not a YouTube video where you can argue with strangers. This is a court of law, where every word you say has weight and consequences. And you're still a child." The courtroom chuckled again, softer this time, but the ridicule was still there. Several attorneys smirked from their seats, enjoying the show. A few members of the audience shook their heads in disbelief. To them, the whole thing looked like a circus, but the boy didn't flinch. His face remained calm, almost too calm for someone his age. He placed his hands on the edge of the table and looked the judge square in the eye. "With respect, Your Honor," he said firmly, "I am aware where I am, and I know exactly what I am doing." The confidence in his voice rattled the room. It was steady, grounded, like someone twice his age. For a moment, even the laughter died down. But before the silence could settle, the opposing attorney jumped in. "This is outrageous," the gray-haired lawyer boomed, his voice filling the room. He stood, his expensive suit catching the light as he gestured dramatically. "Your Honor, how can this be allowed? How can a child stand in this courtroom and pretend to be an attorney? This makes a mockery of the very system we serve." He turned to the boy with a smirk, speaking loudly enough for the audience to hear. "Do you even know the difference between an objection and a motion, boy? Or are you just here to play dress-up?" Laughter rippled through the audience again. The words stung in the air, but the teenager didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he simply adjusted the stack of folders on the table and responded with quiet confidence. "Would you like me to demonstrate, counselor?" he asked calmly. The opposing attorney froze for a split second. His smirk faltered, but he quickly regained it, scoffing loudly. "Demonstrate? This isn't a game, child. You don't demonstrate here. You argue law. You present facts. Something you wouldn't understand." The judge chuckled under his breath, clearly amused by the attorney's remarks. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms, and looked down at the boy. "Counselor is right. You shouldn't be here. But since you're insisting on humiliating yourself, let's see how long you last before I throw you out. I give you 5 minutes." The words echoed in the teenager's mind, not as a threat, but as a challenge. 5 minutes. That was all the judge thought he was worth. That was all the room thought he could last. The boy's lips curved into the faintest smile, almost unnoticeable. He picked up a single folder, flipped it open, and ran his fingers across the highlighted pages. His calmness unsettled the audience. They expected fear. They expected stammering or excuses. Instead, they saw preparation, focus, and control. The boy looked up again, his eyes sharp. "I don't need 5 minutes, Your Honor. I only need one." The courtroom gasped. The audacity, the boldness, it was unlike anything they had seen. Even the opposing attorney's confident grin faltered. The judge narrowed his eyes, no longer amused but irritated by the boy's arrogance. "You think you're clever," the judge muttered. "Fine, prove it." But the mockery didn't stop there. As the proceedings began to shift toward the first witness, whispers filled the room. "This is ridiculous. He won't last a second. He probably memorized a few lines from a law book. His parents should be ashamed for letting him embarrass himself like this." The bailiff leaned toward a clerk and whispered, "I've seen rookies fall apart in here, and they were actual lawyers. This kid doesn't stand a chance." The boy could hear it all, the snickers, the murmurs, the whispers that doubted him. Yet he stayed silent. He didn't bother defending himself against their opinions. Instead, he let the weight of his silence speak louder than their mockery. The judge, still watching him carefully, spoke again. "Tell me, boy, do you even understand the seriousness of this case? Do you understand that people's futures depend on what happens in this room? You are not playing with toys, you're playing with lives. And you're not qualified." The teenager finally lifted his head, his voice low but powerful. "That's exactly why I'm here, Your Honor. Because lives are at stake. And because the truth matters more than the opinion of those who laugh at me." The room fell quiet again, though not entirely. Some were stunned by his composure, others irritated by his confidence. But for the first time, a few curious eyes began to study him. Not as a joke, but as a puzzle they couldn't quite solve. The opposing attorney slammed his hands on the table, breaking the moment of silence. "Enough of this nonsense. This child has no right to question witnesses or argue law. Your Honor, I move to have him removed from these proceedings immediately." The judge looked at the boy, almost enjoying the pressure he was under. "What do you say to that, boy? Do you even know how to respond to such emotion?" The teenager straightened his papers, then calmly replied, "Yes, Your Honor, and I object to counsel's request. I have standing. I have the right to be here, and the law will prove it." Gasps filled the room. The boy had not only understood the motion, he had countered it flawlessly. The judge froze, his smirk slowly fading into curiosity. For the first time, he didn't immediately respond. He leaned forward, studying the boy like a puzzle piece that didn't fit where it should, yet somehow belonged perfectly. The mockery and doubt still hung heavy in the air, but a shift was happening. Some people leaned forward in their seats, sensing something unusual. The boy wasn't cracking. He wasn't folding. Instead, he was slowly, carefully, turning the tide. And though the judge still doubted him, deep down, he couldn't shake a single thought that whispered in his mind. What if this boy actually knows what he's doing? The trial officially began, but the air inside the courtroom felt heavier than before. Every shuffle of paper, every cough, every creak of the wooden benches seemed amplified. People weren't just here for the case anymore. They were here to see how long the teenager would last before the weight of the law crushed him. The opposing attorney, a seasoned man with silver hair and decades of courtroom victories under his belt, stepped forward with booming confidence. His polished shoes clicked against the floor as he approached the jury box. He carried himself like a man who had already won. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice smooth, his gestures rehearsed. "What you will see today is clear, undeniable evidence that the defense has no ground to stand on. The truth is simple. The facts are plain, and by the end of this case, you will see that justice is on our side." He paced slowly, his words deliberate, his tone confident. Each sentence was a carefully crafted performance meant to win the jury's trust. And judging by the nods and attentive eyes in the jury box, it was working. Meanwhile, the boy sat quietly at the defense table, his hands folded neatly over his papers. His expression was unreadable. No signs of panic, no cracks in his composure. To the untrained eye, it looked like he wasn't even paying attention. But to those watching closely, they would have seen his sharp eyes tracking every word, every gesture, every piece of evidence the attorney displayed. When the opposing attorney finished his opening statement, he turned to the boy with a smirk, whispering just loud enough for the jury to hear, "Good luck keeping up, kid." The teenager didn't respond. He simply stood up, buttoned his hoodie like it was a suit jacket, and walked calmly to the center of the room. The judge raised an eyebrow. "You may proceed, boy, but don't waste our time." The teenager nodded once, then turned to face the jury. His voice, though youthful, carried a surprising steadiness. "Ladies and gentlemen, you've just heard a polished speech full of confidence. But confidence doesn't make something true. Facts do. Evidence does. And before this trial ends, you'll see that the story you've just been told doesn't match the truth." The room grew quiet. There was no drama in his tone, no exaggerated gestures, no theatrical pacing. Just calm, precise words. It was so unexpected from someone his age that people leaned in almost against their will to hear what he would say next. He didn't speak for long. Instead, he ended with a simple promise. "I will prove it to you." Then he returned to his seat, leaving the air thick with curiosity. The trial moved forward. The prosecution called its first witness, a man whose testimony was supposed to solidify their entire case. The opposing attorney guided the witness with ease, leading him through rehearsed statements and carefully chosen answers. It looked airtight. The jury nodded along. Even the judge appeared convinced. Then came the moment everyone was waiting for. The teenager stood up slowly, carrying nothing but a notepad and a pen. "Your Honor," he said firmly, "I'd like to cross-examine the witness." The courtroom fell silent. It was as if the air had been sucked out of the room. The judge smirked, clearly amused by the boy's nerve. "Go ahead, boy. Let's see what you think you can do." The teenager approached the witness stand with measured steps. He didn't rush. He didn't stumble. He walked as if he had done it 100 times before. His first question was so simple that people chuckled. "What time did you arrive at the scene?" The witness answered confidently, "Around 8:30 p.m. The boy nodded, scribbling something on his notepad. Then he asked another question, this one just as straightforward. But slowly, question by question, the witness began to contradict himself. The teenager wasn't asking random things. He was carefully weaving a trap. "Earlier, you said you were at the gas station at 8:45 p.m., which is it 8:30 or 8:45? The witness hesitated. "Well, it was close to 8:30. Maybe I was off by a few minutes." The teenager didn't push. He simply moved on, asking about the car the witness claimed to have seen, about the lighting in the area, about the distance from where he stood. Each question chipped away at the man's credibility. Within 10 minutes, the confident witness was sweating, fumbling with his words. The jury exchanged uneasy glances. The opposing attorney shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Then came the final blow. The teenager pulled out a receipt from his folder and handed it to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. This receipt shows that at 8:32 p.m., the witness was paying for groceries at a store 5 miles away from scene, which means, Your Honor, he couldn't possibly have been where he claimed. Gasps filled the courtroom. The witness stammered, his face pale. The opposing attorney shot to his feet, shouting, "Objection! This is outrageous." But the judge slammed his gavel. "Overruled. Sit down." For the first time, the judge's tone wasn't mocking. It was serious. He leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the boy, as though trying to figure out how a teenager had just dismantled a grown man's testimony with such precision. The teenager turned back to the jury, his voice calm but powerful. "Ladies and gentlemen, truth doesn't hide. It reveals itself when you ask the right questions. And that's what we will continue to do." The jury members looked at one another, some nodding slowly. The tide was shifting. The opposing attorney tried to recover, calling another witness, but the boy repeated the same strategy. Calm, precise questions that exposed lies, contradictions, and gaps in story. Witness after witness faltered under his quiet pressure. By the time he finished his second cross-examination, the one smug attorney looked rattled, his confidence cracking. The audience, who had once mocked the boy, now sat in stunned silence. The judge, too, was no longer leaning back with a smirk. He was leaning forward, his chin resting on his hand, watching the boy intently. The courtroom battle had begun, and against every expectation, the teenager wasn't just surviving, he was winning. The courtroom had changed. What had begun as a circus, with laughter echoing off the walls and mocking smirks at every corner, was now tense and heavy with silence. Every eye was fixed on the teenager. Every whisper had died away. Even the judge, once amused by what he thought was a child's foolish game, was leaning forward, his smirk long gone, replaced by an expression curiosity, and maybe even doubt. The boy didn't bask in the attention. He didn't smile or smirk. He simply returned to his table, shuffled his folders with the same steady hands, and waited. His movements carried no trace of arrogance. Instead, there was discipline, a calmness that didn't match his age. The judge tapped his pen against the bench, the sound sharp in the stillness. Finally, he spoke. "Where did you learn to do that?" His words weren't sarcastic this time. They were quiet, thoughtful, almost reluctant, as if he couldn't believe he was asking. The boy adjusted his glasses, his gaze unwavering. "By studying the law, Your Honor, the same way every attorney here did. The only difference is I had to study harder because no one believed in me." A hush swept across the courtroom. The words landed heavy, like stones dropping into water. Even the opposing attorney, who had once laughed the loudest, sat frozen, his mouth pressed into a thin line. The judge's eyes narrowed, searching the boy's face as though trying to uncover a trick. But all he saw was sincerity. This wasn't a boy bluffing his way through. This was someone who had put in the work. Long nights, endless hours of study, discipline that most adults couldn't muster. The opposing attorney, refusing to surrender his pride, slammed his palm against the table. "This is ridiculous. He's just a child. He doesn't belong here. He's—" "Sit down, counselor," the judge interrupted sharply, his gavel striking once. "You've had your turn. Now let him finish." The attorney froze, his eyes widening. For the first time that day, the judge was siding with the teenager. The boy stood again, his presence commanding the room in a way no one expected. He began to present his own evidence. Not with flair, not with theatrics, but with precision. Every page was tabbed. Every exhibit was organized. He presented receipts, photographs, and timelines that had been overlooked, piecing together a puzzle that even experienced lawyers had missed. As he spoke, his voice never wavered. "Here is the timeline of events. Here is the documented proof. Here is a contradiction in the witness statement." He moved methodically, never rushing, never stumbling. The jurors leaned forward, scribbling notes furiously. The clerks exchanged surprised glances. And somewhere in the gallery, someone whispered, "He's not a kid, he's a genius." The boy's confidence grew with every passing moment, not because the courtroom was finally taking him seriously, but because the truth was unfolding exactly as he knew it would. The opposing attorney tried to interrupt, but the boy was ready. Each objection was countered with sharp clarity. Objection irrelevant. Overruled, the judge said, glancing at the boy's evidence. Objection, hearsay. Not hearsay, Your Honor, the boy replied calmly. This document is a direct statement made by the witness under oath. It qualifies as admissible. The judge nodded slowly, impressed. Objection overruled. Each time the boy responded, the judge's respect grew. The audience, who had mocked him at the beginning, now watched in stunned silence. Their laughter had turned into awe. Finally, the boy delivered a devastating piece of evidence, a video recording that directly contradicted the prosecution's key witness. The room gasped as the truth played out on the screen. The witness who claimed to have been at the scene was clearly elsewhere at the same time. The opposing attorney buried his face in his hands. His case was crumbling. No, it was collapsing, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The boy turned back to the judge. Your Honor, every piece of evidence presented today points to one conclusion. The testimony against my client is unreliable, and the case lacks foundation. The defense rests. The silence that followed was overwhelming. For several long seconds, no one moved. Then, slowly, the judge set down his pen and leaned back in his chair. His expression had changed entirely. There was no trace of mockery left, No arrogance, only respect. Young man, the judge said carefully, his voice softer than anyone had ever heard it. You've done something remarkable here today. I admit I doubted you. I mocked you. I thought you were here to waste my time. But you've proven yourself, not just to me, but to everyone in this courtroom. The boy gave a small nod, not smug, not boastful, just steady. Thank you, Your Honor. But I didn't come here for recognition. I came here for justice. Those words struck deeper than any legal argument. Justice. That was what the courtroom was supposed to stand for. And somehow, a teenager had reminded them all of it. The jury looked at the boy with admiration. Some members of the gallery even clapped softly before the bailiff silenced them. The opposing attorney, once towering with confidence, now looked defeated. His shoulders slumped as he avoided the boy's gaze. The judge studied the boy a moment longer, then gave a slow nod of respect. You've earned your place in this courtroom, and you've earned mine. For the first time that day, the boy allowed himself a small smile, not of victory, but of relief. He had carried the weight of doubt, mockery, and ridicule on his shoulders, and he had walked through it unshaken. What began as a joke had become a lesson that brilliance doesn't wear an age, that discipline and truth can outshine arrogance, and that respect isn't given, it's earned. And on that day, in that courtroom, a teenager had earned the respect of everyone, including the very judge who had once mocked him. The courtroom felt like it was holding its breath. For hours, everyone had watched a teenager do the impossible, dismantle a case piece by piece, cross-examine witnesses with surgical precision, and present evidence so flawless it left seasoned attorneys speechless. What began as laughter had turned into awe. What began as mockery had turned into silence. Now, the moment of truth had arrived. The boy stood in the center of the room, his hands clasped in front of him, his eyes steady on the jury. He didn't need to raise his voice. The quiet authority in his tone carried more weight than 100 shouted speeches. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, we started this case with laughter. You laughed at me because of my age. You laughed because I didn't look the part. And maybe you had a reason. After all, what business does a teenager have in a courtroom like this? He paused, letting the words sink in. Jurors shifted in their seats. The audience leaned forward. Even the judge's eyes softened, watching closely. But justice, the boy continued, his voice steady, isn't about appearances. It isn't about who wears the best suit or who has the most years of experience. Justice is about truth. And the truth doesn't care how old you are or what you look like or whether the world believes in you. The truth stands on its own. He walked slowly toward the jury box, his sneakers squeaking softly against the polished floor. You've seen the evidence. You've seen the contradictions. You've seen how the testimony against my client crumbled under its own lies. And now, the choice is yours, not to decide who looks more convincing, but to decide what the truth really is. The jury members watched him with rapt attention. Some nodded slowly. Others scribbled notes furiously. But none looked away. The boy finished with a final simple statement. Justice isn't about me. It isn't about my age. It isn't even about this courtroom. It's about what's right. And today, the truth has been revealed. I trust you to see it. He returned to his table, sat down, and folded his hands. No drama. No theatrics, just quiet confidence. The opposing attorney didn't even rise for a rebuttal. He knew the case was lost. His shoulders sagged in defeat, his eyes downcast. The man who once smirked at the boy now couldn't even look at him. The judge cleared his throat, his voice heavier than before. The jury will deliberate. The jurors filed out, and the room buzzed with whispers. Some people murmured in disbelief. Others in admiration. For the first time in decades, a courtroom filled with professionals had been humbled by someone who was barely old enough to drive. Minutes passed, then an hour. Finally, the jury returned. The foreman stood, holding the slip of paper that carried the verdict. In the case of the state versus the defense, he said clearly, we, the jury, find in favor of the defense. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Then silence. Then slowly, a wave of applause began in the gallery. soft at first but building in strength. The bailiff tried to quiet them, but even he couldn't hide the smile tugging at his lips. The judge banged his gavel, but not in anger. His voice carried respect, almost reverence. Case dismissed. He turned his eyes to the boy, and for a moment, it looked as though he didn't know what to say. Finally, he spoke. "Young man, when you walked into this courtroom, I mocked you. I doubted you. I thought you were here to waste my time. But you have shown more discipline, skill, and courage than lawyers twice your age. You have reminded us all what this room is supposed to stand for: justice. For that, I thank you." The boy stood, gathering his folders with the same calm dignity he had shown since the beginning. He didn't gloat. He didn't brag. He simply nodded at the judge, then turned to leave. As he walked toward the courtroom doors, whispers followed him. "Who is he? Where did he come from? He's just a kid, but he's brilliant." Some people called out words of admiration. Others simply stared in awe. But the boy didn't need their applause. He hadn't come for recognition. He hadn't come for fame. He had come for justice, and he had achieved it. The opposing attorney sat slumped at his table, defeated. For the rest of his career, he would never forget the day he was outsmarted by a teenager. And the judge? He leaned back in his chair, staring at the empty doorway where the boy had just exited. His thoughts echoed in silence. Never again will I underestimate someone based on how they look, because genius, courage, and truth can come in the most unexpected disguises. Outside the courthouse, the boy walked into the sunlight, the weight of the folders still in his hands, but the burden of doubt gone from his shoulders. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, and people crowded around him. But he didn't stop. He didn't need their validation. He knew the truth. For the world, this was a headline: a prodigy who stunned the courtroom. For the people inside, it was a memory they would never forget. And for the judge, it was a lesson carved into his conscience forever. Never mock, never belittle, never underestimate. Because sometimes the sharpest minds come in the smallest packages. Sometimes the greatest attorneys don't look like attorneys at all. And sometimes the person you laugh at is the one who will teach you the meaning of justice. And so, the story of the teenager who stood in court and triumphed wasn't just about winning a case. It was about changing minds. It was about breaking stereotypes. And it was about proving once and for all that respect isn't given because of age, status, or appearance. It's earned through courage, preparation, and truth. That day would be remembered as the day a boy became more than a boy. He became a symbol of what it truly means to fight for justice. And no one, least of all the judge, would ever forget it.